Okay, hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gertis. I'm a professor who tries to help you have some context on the war in Ukraine. Every week on Sunday or Monday, I do a weekly recap, a weekly overview of the events of the previous week. All I'm doing is reviewing the headlines that I have determined were important that I make my videos on YouTube. And if you get some value out of this, I would hope, if you haven't seen me before, that you'd consider subscribing. And if you have seen me before, consider ringing that bell so that you're notified I do daily updates. Okay, so Sunday, August 13th, and we're rolling the clock back 1 week. RT says that former Zelensky advisor claims that dehumanizing Russians has backfired. And he said, quote, "The main thing that we did was allow ourselves to dehumanize Russians. This was our main mistake. At first we held on, and then we delved into all that with pleasure. The collective Ukrainians, I mean. We allowed that to pour into the internet." Arestovich said. He added that such behavior gave average mobilized Russians, not professional soldiers, an excellent motivation to fight. I'm not sure that I buy his analysis about giving motivation to fight, but to the degree that you don't dehumanize other people, that's a helpful thing. Although I don't fault anyone in Ukraine for doing this right now when your houses are being bombed and just the the atrocities perpetrated on civilians by the Russians. I get. So I'm not about to throw stones. It is better to not objectify or dehumanize people, but again, the Russians are doing such outrageous things to Ukrainians. I get why they're doing that. Okay, RT carried a headline that Trump said that his chances are close to 100%. Well, he was indicted for the fourth time since then, and honestly, it seems weird, but every time he's indicted, his poll numbers go up because people think that he's being politically persecuted, and so they're supporting him. It's weird, I understand, but I mean, that's what it is. Okay, sappers need help demining the most heavily mined country in the world. If you see maps of where the mines are, it'll just, I'm not punning here, it'll just be mind-blowing. It's really just, I mean, Russians have had 6 months in order to lay these mines, and they have done it very effectively, and they're causing the Ukrainians a lot of grief in the process, slowing the counteroffensive way down. And they do need the demining equipment, and they don't have overhead air support in order to help them actually make this happen. All right, Kyiv reports at least 500 children killed, 1,000 injured since the war began. It's absolutely horrible. 500 children killed, and that's only that we have been able to count. There may very well be more. Russian warship fires warning shot at a cargo ship in the Black Sea. So the Russians were being more aggressive than normal, but again, they also have to be more defensive than normal because of what has happened with the Sea Baby drones. Okay, Monday the 14th. Ukraine proposes a grain route to the Baltic through Klaipeda. And this is how they got grain out before. It might not have been this exact same route, but it went into the Baltic Sea. Now, the Baltic Sea is far north of, so the previously established alternative was to go through almost to, not Italy, but the other side of Italy, the eastern coast where Italy is, into the Mediterranean. That's a little bit more efficient, but either way gets it out, and that's what they're trying to do. Zelensky says that smoke on the Kerch Bridge proves that Russian crimes will not go unanswered. Zelensky's the man. I mean, I wrote the book on Zelensky. It's here. It's free on Kindle Unlimited. It's otherwise $3.99. I said it really cheap so that you can read it. It covers the war from the very beginning until about 5 months in, about Severodonetsk, Lysychansk. That's when I switched gears and went over to YouTube, and so you can find my YouTube videos from that point forward because I'm trying to reach as many people as I can with this message to be able to support Ukraine. Okay, back to this. So these attacks on the Kerch or in Moscow this week, a couple times in Moscow, they're sending messages to the Russians that, you know what, we can still hit you too. And, the Kerch Bridge is going to be hit and disabled soon. I can almost guarantee it. Okay, major fire at an auto repair shop in southern Russia. Not sure exactly what that was. Like, you could still have fires in Russia that are not related to, but it's just the amount of these are, they're adding up. Okay, Central Russian Bank to hold major meeting after the ruble falls. So the ruble is now at something like 1 to 100, $1 to 100 rubles. It's a psychological barrier. It went down lower than that at the beginning of the war and then rebounded. But what's happening in the Russian economy is not lending itself to a strong ruble. Now, this is good and bad for Russia. It's good for them to be able to make some things cheaply internally. It's good in one way, but it's going to cause massive inflation for the citizens of Russia. So, yeah. Okay. Zelensky meets with commanders in Donetsk frontline positions. Again, I can't say it enough, but Zelensky's the man. He's gone to the front line multiple times and gone to see what's going on and gone to offer encouragement and provide awards to his soldiers. And you just don't see that on the other side. Okay, Tuesday, August 15th, there's corruption. The head of the judicial administration is removed by high anti-corruption court for bribery. Now, there's been a number of these kind of events over the last 3 weeks or so. There's been at least a half dozen, probably upwards of a dozen of these kinds of things. So the downside is that corruption's still happening. The upside is they're really addressing it in a very aggressive way. Pravda says that the counteroffensive fails, and I did a whole video on this. You don't get to say that the counteroffensive fails. The counteroffensive fails when it's over and they haven't made the progress. But as long as they keep fighting, you can't say that it's over. You don't get to have that say. Pravda also says that Russian troops go on a major counteroffensive before the decisive battle of 2024. I'm not sure how they're going to do that because they got to get through that same minefield that they have demined themselves. They have mined the ground, so there's a line, and getting over that to be offensive seems like it's going to be pretty tricky. So I think that the Russians are actually just trying to hold on to the land that they've already stolen, and that's where they want to freeze things. Okay, so next thing, interest rate hike is a band-aid. This was in the Guardian, and they called it a plaster. I think that's the term for a band-aid but I change it because I understand Band-Aid for Russian economic woes. This interest rate hike is not going to cure what ails them. Stopping spending money like a drunken sailor and attacking Ukraine will actually help heal the economy, but not doing what they're doing. Russian explosion in Dagestan kills 30. Fox says that Biden was rebuked for ignoring wildfires in Hawaii and prioritizing Ukraine over the American people. I was going to do a video on this, and then I ran out of time. I did a video on this. It was showing the contrast between here's the images of the volcano and the fires and that kind of thing, and then here's Ukrainians partying on a beach in Odessa. This was on Twitter. This wasn't me creating it. And this is the kind of thing that's being shown to people who are already predisposed to be against Ukraine, and it just doesn't seem right. So what Biden needed to do was keep his eye on the ball of what's going on with Ukraine, just like the train issue in Pennsylvania about 6 months ago or however long ago that was. You have to do that. Otherwise, your political opponents, and you're going to have political opponents, are going to smear you with that. And Biden's been in power for 50 years. So he should have been, he was a senator before I was born. Wrap that around your mind. Okay. Russia's countrywide missile barrage as Putin to speak at security conference. Usually when Zelensky goes to a conference, a NATO conference or an EU conference or something, there's this big barrage. But this time it was when he was going to speak, and that might have just been accidental luck of the draw, but he usually does this, throws this temper tantrum of barraging cities when Zelensky is speaking before a big conference. The Moscow Times, Russian defense minister threatens to use cluster munitions. Oh, I mean, what kind of threat is that? You've already used cluster munitions. We're pretty sure. So the threat of using them doesn't really make a whole lot. So what? Zelensky visits brigades in Zaporizhia, and then there was this really fascinating article that I did an entire video about. Jonathan Little interview. Nothing changes unless Russia is defeated. And go back and watch that video because that's really, really important. If Russia just gets to keep something or has a brokered peace or whatever, and then can go lick its wounds and rebuild, it's coming back again. unless Russia's really defeated, I mean soundly defeated, like, and I think the I don't know that it'll be defeat on the battlefield so much as defeat that economically they can't sustain the battlefield, and that causes some kind of implosion within the system itself. That happened after Afghanistan with the Soviets. It happened after Tsar Alexander with Crimea. I'm trying to remember which Tsar it was with Crimea. So it can be very bad, and unless that changes, now when the example that I would give is after World War II, the Japanese had a cultural renovation. The Germans had a cultural renovation. And the Japanese and Germans aren't the warlike peoples that they once were, where the Bushido culture in Japan, for example, was dominant. And in Germany, they're like peaceniks now, generally speaking. I mean, for the most part, they're like, I don't know, we want to give tanks. That's a bad look. So they got it. They got it. But they have to be defeated in order to actually have those cultural changes there. Otherwise, they're just going to carry on with the culture and culture is very powerful. Whether it's in organizations or in countries, it's incredibly powerful, and you need to be aware of that. It's going to override you unless it is overridden and intentionally rewritten. Okay, Wednesday, August 16th, 60,000 Ukrainians in occupied areas forcibly mobilized to fight against Ukraine. This was a Kharkiv human rights article. 60,000. Now, I'm imagining that not all 60,000 wanted to fight for Donbass or for, the whatever republic. And that's crazy that these Ukrainians are forcibly mobilized into that, and many of them have been killed. Defense forces liberate Urzane in Donetsk region from the occupiers, and that's a small place, but it's still progress, right? I mean, the progress is measured in meters, not in kilometers like you would like it to have been. And we got spoiled with the Kharkiv offensive thinking, wow, they're going to have this blitzkrieg, and you can't blitzkrieg across the minefield. It's just not working. Okay, the first ship leaves port of Odessa along civilian corridor since the grain deal ended. It was a Hong Kong flagship, which I found really interesting. Like, maybe you don't want to fire on China. Maybe that's not a good plan. Ukraine will not be part of NATO as the alliance will not last another decade, says Pravda. Really? Okay, RT says Ukrainian leadership is split over the counteroffensive, and they might be, but they were, of course, amplifying that message. Ukrainian farmers are struggling to sell their harvest. This was in Radio Free Europe, and that's right. They're struggling to get their harvest out, and they're having real problems with that. Putin is to discuss capital controls to prop up the ruble. Good luck. I mean, I know how you can stop it, but you're not going to listen to me. NATO official says that his comments about land for entrance into NATO were a mistake. And so this is where this NATO official was saying, well, if they trade this land, they can come into NATO, just, give up those oblasts. And yeah, it was off the cuff, I think, remark that was a very bad look. Ukraine rejected that NATO official's comment about giving up land in the strongest possible terms. That leads us to Thursday, the 17th of August. And the first article there was that the NATO chief, Jens Stoltenberg, said that only Ukraine can decide conditions for negotiations. And that's right. But he had to come out and confirm that shows just how big that comment was. Russian general, a top leader in the early Ukraine invasion, his name is Gennady Zhidko, dies after a long illness, but he's only 58. So I don't know if there was anything nefarious. I mean, people die at 58 because they get sick with cancer or whatever else. I mean, that happens. But you don't want to be too suspicious and blame everything on nefarious Russian things, but I wouldn't fault somebody for being suspicious. Okay, I'm not saying that he died under suspicious causes or whatever, but it's just something to keep an eye on if you're looking about, articles about Zhidko. Ukraine Air Force claims it shot down a Ka-52 helicopter on Thursday. That was good. Now, this article was interesting just for the title alone. And not that the rest of it wasn't, but a CNN article says the counteroffensive inches forward. And that's what it feels like. It's going very, very slowly because the defensive positions are pretty good defensive positions. Zelensky says in Interfax, Ukraine significantly decreased drone production, and I've read multiple articles about that. RT talks about how Ukraine's high hopes for F-16s have been dashed. Again, this is premature. A few days later, we're going to find out that the Americans have okayed it, and that the Danish and the Denmark and the Netherlands, I think, were the two countries that are going to be supplying upwards of maybe 42, I think, F-16s. So again, you can say things, but just saying things doesn't mean that anything's happening. Ukrainian counteroffensive inches forward with the help of cluster munitions, another article, and Applebaum had this article that Putin is destroying modern Russia. And that's right. He really is. I don't think the West has been nearly as successful in its sanctions and what the West has done directly to Russia as Russia has been to herself in tearing herself down. And I think that's a fair assessment. And then hundreds of men illegally cross into Romania. That's a really interesting thing too, because now there are cowards in every country, right? These guys are trying to save their neck, and I get that it's the wrong time to be crossing into Romania, but they're paying off Romanians to get them or smuggle them across the border, because it's every man on deck. We need all the defense we can get if we're in Ukraine. And yeah, but it's hundreds. It's not thousands, and it's not a million. Like, million is a ballpark figure, but give or take, right? But what happened when Russia mobilized? Upwards of 1 million men fled the country. So it's a different look. Okay, Friday the 18th, another Ukrainian drone attacks Moscow, and I covered that. I talked about that in a video. Russia passes 24-year sentences on Azov prisoners of war in Donetsk People's Republic. Like, that's the kind of thing that they're doing. Like, and in Russia, like, they're giving huge sentences for speaking out against the government. They're like re-Sovietizing, if I could say it that way. Russia mobilizes about 20,000 people per month. What kind of training they get or how good the training is a whole different question, and it's probably not that significant, but nonetheless, that's what's happening. Battlefield deaths, according to The Guardian, have risen sharply. Both sides combined, it's something like north of 500,000. So it's gone up sharply this year. Okay, Ukraine shaking up military enlistment system. So there was this terrible bit about Yevgenev Brojasov. I can't remember explain how to pronounce that right. The head of the Odessa Region Military Enlistment Office. There was a report that, and I'm quoting now, a report that 4.35 million seaside villa in Marbella, that's in Spain, has been purchased by this guy. And along with an office in the Spanish resort city and a luxury car. Yeah, and so, yeah, he's taken bribes, and that's not cool. He's been caught, and he's being prosecuted. But the article went on to say a nation of roughly 40 million has assembled an army of some 700,000 soldiers, plus 250,000 servicemen of the National Guard, border guards, and police, according to the defense minister. Wow, that's pretty significant. So Ukraine has a pretty strong army, and they have been getting better and better and better with better weapons over time. Yes, is there some attrition? Unfortunately, yes, there is. But they're far stronger than they were when this thing started. Okay, this was in Pravda. A new map of Ukraine after Ukraine's surrender shows that there's essentially no Ukraine. Most of it is Russia, some Romania, some Poland, and there's no Ukraine. And they do this periodically. It's a perennial favorite in Pravda. Okay, Pravda. Lukashenko says that Russia has accomplished its goals in Ukraine. Really? Okay. Zelensky signs a new law on duty and VAT exemptions for optics and anti-drone guns. That's not a surprise. I mean, you want to make it as easy as possible to get the munitions that you need, and so they're working on that. So this is where the Denmark and Netherlands confirmed their approval to transfer F-16 fighters today, after Pravda or RT, I don't remember which, said they're not going to get it. They only have, and it was laughable because they only had like 6 pilots training or something like that, but they're about to they've just gotten the approval to transfer F-16 fighters. U.S. expands Ukrainian immigration program to 167,000. And what happened there was you had these temporary permits, and there were a smaller number, and they've expanded it pretty significantly. Ukraine and Romania sign an accord to boost grain exports through Romania. That's a good thing. It'll help this get out. Optimally, you want to go through the Black Sea, but any route, if you want to go up the Danube, that works too. Russian priest consecrates a monument to Stalin. Like, get that in your mind, right? Stalin was killing priests, but this Russian priest thought it was a good idea. Now, in their defense, this was carried in Pravda. In defense, there was a later Pravda article saying that the official church doesn't condone what this priest did, but wow. Okay. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty said the dramatic pace of regress that Putin is destroying modern Russia. And I talked about that a little bit ago. They're bringing back Soviet-style government, political prisoners, no freedom of speech, all kinds of things. That it's just what's happening is just it's destroying Russia from the inside. Okay, Saturday, the 19th of August, there was a Russian attack on a drama theater in Cherniv. It wasn't just a drama theater, it was a city square. Drama theaters hit. Early reports were 5 killed, 37 injured. Later, it turns out that there was, and this wasn't the last report, but one of the later reports, 7 killed, 144 wounded in the Reuters report. Zelensky and the UN condemned the Chernov attack, and I mean, there was no military target anywhere there. I mean, this is just a war crime, and the Russians love to scream about terrorism whenever they're attacked for anything, but this is terrorism. That's what it is. Putin held a meeting at the command center at Rostov-on-Don, and that was all the article said. It was carried in Kremlin.ru, like their official page. Like, I'm surprised that they didn't say he was at the front line. Trilateral Security Summit, the U.S., South Korea, and Japan met together and reaffirmed their commitment to support Ukraine. That was good to see. German defense company Rheinmetall AG to start repairing Leopard tanks delivered from Ukraine to get those back up and running again. Then there was this really interesting article about Sarkozy. Nicolas Sarkozy, the former president of France, was putting out a memoir. And he was defending Putin. Like, it was weird. I'm going to quote some things. Quote, "It is said we are fighting a war against Russia without fighting it. Clearly, we are not engaged on the ground, but we are delivering weapons to one of the belligerents," he writes. Quote, "Russia will remain our neighbor, whether we like it or not. We must find ways and means to reestablish neighborly or at least calmer relations." And then another quote, "Russia has to renounce all military action against its neighbors. Ukraine must pledge to remain neutral." Like, the only reason that they're fighting with Ukraine is because they're not NATO. Like, if they were NATO, they would have been left alone. NATO could at the same time affirm its willingness to respect and take into account Russia's historic fear of being encircled by unfriendly neighbors. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. Unfriendly neighbors. Russia is the unfriendly neighbor invading Ukraine. He described the return of Crimea as illusory. Okay, so Sarkozy is a piece of crap. I'm not a big fan of Sarkozy, and this is just not. This isn't cool in any way, shape, or form. I'm sorry. I probably should be more tempered in my assessment here, but he just works my nerves when he's saying that kind of thing. But it is providing some insight about how the French actually think. There's a big swath of France that always thinks about, well, you're going to have to do business with Russia, and this is emblematic of that kind of thing. Ukraine in talks with Sweden over the production of combat vehicles. These are C-790s. Sky News carried this article that Zelensky is resolute, but the West wobbles as the spring counteroffensive stalls. And they say in this, Ukraine's much anticipated spring counteroffensive is now in its 10th week with limited evidence of any significant breakthrough of the formidable Russian defenses. That's right. Zelensky and Ukraine are resolute, but the West is a little bit like, well, where are the results? And that's what Putin is counting on. Okay, Sunday, yesterday, August 20th, Ukraine drone hits a railway station in Kursk. I don't know enough about it to be able to really comment on it. It doesn't seem like it was much of a blow, but Ukraine keeps putting out these feelers to see what they can get through, and I think something big will be coming on the other side of that. RT had this article that I think I might even do a video about, from Genghis Khan with rockets to a gas station with nukes, how the EU's top diplomats updated a lazy Russophobic slur. And the point of that was that, like, for a long time, these people have just been Russophobic. Well, why have they been Russophobic? What's going on? And I'll talk about that, I think, in another video. Russia's Luna spacecraft crashes into the moon. It's like a metaphor alert, right? Like they couldn't do that right. They're racing with China and India to get to the moon and land and do some research there, and it went south. Okay, Netherlands and Denmark to supply F-16s up to 42. Now that's an official thing. They're trying to figure out how many, but as opposed to what RT or Pravda was saying earlier in the week about how, yep, see, they're just not getting the F-16s. No, they're getting the F-16s. And then the last article was that Crimea is facing gas shortages, and it's not just going to be gas shortages. Food shortages and water shortages are on the way. Just watch. All right, that's all that I have. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me this far. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. If you have subscribed but you haven't rung the bell, please ring the bell. I do these every day, and I want to keep you informed. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.